This is Two-Way Tonight. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. We're going to talk mostly about the vice president's interview that she did earlier today with Brett Baer. Probably most of you saw it, but we're going to look at some clips. There are a couple new polls, and we've got a great pollster with us and a Republican strategist who wrote a piece on Substack that I want to talk about as well. So those will be the main things we do. The polls are kind of confusing. Um, we'll put them up. First, a national poll from Fox that was released within Brett's show, special report. Um, it's very confusing because it shows, go ahead and put that up. It shows Trump up nationally, uh, 50 to 48, which is a flip from where they had it in September. But they also have a number, they say it's the battleground state number that shows Harris up somewhat substantially. So could it be that Kamala Harris wins the electoral college and loses the popular vote? I suppose it could. I don't rule it out actually. And as I'm sure most of you know, the Fox poll is a respected poll. It's done by bipartisan outside pollsters. But that number is not consistent with most of the other recent national polls. Could be it's on the leading edge of change, or it could be it's off. We'll see. Then Quinnipiac did a couple polls they put out today um, on um, on the battleground states. Georgia, Trump up 7. Again, that's larger than we've seen. And Harris up in North Carolina. Of course, we all know it's difficult to poll North Carolina right now. So I don't consider any of that data to be particularly compelling, just because to the extent it's in line with other things, it's in line with other things, and to the extent it's not, it doesn't to me clearly foreshadow anything else. If we have time, we're going to talk about the lip reading that people are doing of a exchange between President Biden and President Obama at Ethel Kennedy's memorial service. It's kind of an interesting moment that's going to get a lot of attention, and in some quarters already has. But let's talk about the interview. Um, I'll suspend suspense and say most people I've talked to, in my own judgment, is it's not going to impact the race. Um, she did well in some ways, I think, and poorly in others. I think if you're inclined to be critical of her, you'd say she was evasive. You'd say she was angry. You'd say that she was over-rehearsed, and you would say she didn't deliver a soundbite. And she had a phrase she used a couple times on tough questions: "I will enforce the law," or the laws of the nation. To me, that's ripe to become the new no controlling legal authority. It's a meaningless expression. We'll look at some of the moments in a moment. If you're inclined to say she did well, I think she was combative with Brett. She didn't let him, try to control the interview. She pushed back. I think she gave her best answer yet, although still for many inexplicably weak, about how she's different than Joe Biden. And I think probably most of all, given that the campaign seems to have switched its message, and maybe this is their message for the last few days of the campaign, to just demonizing Donald Trump and saying Donald can't go back to all the things that are horrible about Donald Trump. I think she did a very good job of not only hitting that message, but turning the questions when they weren't about that to that topic. And I think she's going to have to do more of that. One of the people who was most critical of her performance in my world, who communicated with me during and after, said it's impossible for him to imagine the campaign putting her on Joe Rogan. That Brett was forceful, but he was also polite and kind of within the lines of appropriate questions. He did the technique of showing her some things on video, which I thought was effective. I'm a big fan of doing that. So we're going to look at four clips from the interview. Eager to hear what folks think. We've got two guests at least we want to bring in after we look at the clips, but we do want to hear from you. So if you're here on the Two-Way platform and you'd like to get into the conversation, please raise your hand. If you're watching on YouTube or on Two-Way and you're inclined to engage in text in the chat, please, peace, love, and understanding on all nights, but particularly on this night, stay away from negative personal attacks on the vice president or anybody else, including your fellow members of the Two-Way community. So, um, first clip I want to look at is from uh, the segment where Brett, I think quite predictably because of the Fox audience and because of her previous evasions, went after her on immigration. And he did what I thought he might do, and what I did this morning on the morning meeting, in a version of it, is he personalized it by bringing up one of the families affected by the murder of an American by someone allegedly by someone here in the country illegally. So let's look at clip 1, please.
Let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I am so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in all fairness, I told you, I feel awful.
Okay. So I believe that's the first time she's been asked to address it in that way. And again, one of the illustrative things there was she handled the personalization of it, and she turned it back on Donald Trump in the way she has when immigration's come up. All right. Second clip. Her third try, high-profile try of saying how she'd be different than the Biden administration. To some ears, to my ear, this is the furthest she's gone in trying to give voters a sense things would be different. To other people's ears, it still fell short of specificity that would break through a Green Bay diner. So let's listen to clip 2, please.
You're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing in America and bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the issue of small businesses, which is about working with the private sector to bring more capital and access to capital to our small business leaders, including my plan for a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and for small businesses, extending the tax deduction from $5,000 to $50,000.
We've heard a lot about those plans.
Okay. I think to the extent I can divine what they wanted the soundbite to be, it seems like they wanted the soundbite to be, my administration will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's. She then added a point of differentiation that I don't remember her doing. Others may remember, but basically saying I'm not like Joe Biden implicitly. I'm not a guy someone who's worked in Washington for 50 years. And I think those are better answers again to those breakthrough in Green Bay diners. All right. Brett talked to her about the ad that had been run by Team Trump on transgender surgeries paid for by taxpayers for those incarcerated or those in the country illegally. One of the few ads in this campaign that some people are saying are actually broken through, that Republicans feel confident. And there are Democrats and pro-Harris people like my friend Joe Klein who believe that issue has been very damaging. So he showed the ad in which she seems to be saying on camera quite directly that that's something she supports. Let's play clip 3.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law. And it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries happened during his presidency.
Well, you got to take responsible for what happened in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in his presidency.
It's in black and white.
Would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
you would have a say as president.
So, two things about that answer. First of all, I think probably the Trump people will take her saying you have to take responsibility for what happened in your administration. That's, I think, pretty obvious. We'll be seeing that. But the other thing is, and again, Brett was doing a tough thing. He had a limited amount of time. The way the interview ended, for those of you who saw it, was he had 4 aides waving at him, Harris aides saying, "You got to end the interview now." So he's obviously under a lot of pressure. But I wouldn't have let that one drop if it's just second guessing from afar, because saying I will follow the law rather than are you for this? Is your policy preference for this or not? I think is a pretty Weasley answer, and it's her right to give a Weasley answer. But I really would have stayed with that if I were Brett, as long as it took to get the answer to the question, because I don't really know what the answer is. I don't know whether she supports it or not. I'll follow the law is, wow, that's just like again, it's like no controlling legal authority. All right, last clip I want to look like, and some of her supporters are saying this was maybe her best moment of the interview, when she got pretty heated back and forth with Brett on the issue of Donald Trump's recent rhetoric about the enemy from within. Clip 4, please.
Question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
He's quoted in the Bob Woodward book that way, yes. Let me ask you this, Madam Vice President. You call Donald Trump...
The significance of that.
You call Donald Trump...
Okay. So I will say that if the winning message, which it appears the campaign now thinks it is, if the winning message is to hold Donald Trump accountable for his actions and his words, violating the norms of the country, threatening constitutional principles, that, to me, that's amongst her best performances in passionately, unscripted, making that case. And so what I'm curious about now, besides what our guests think, which we'll bring them in, Noah, you could start pinning folks if you would. What I'm curious about now is how will this interview be covered? I know how it's going to be covered on Red Twitter. I'm curious to see how it's covered on local news in Philadelphia and Green Bay. I'm curious to see how it's covered on the network morning shows, on cable news tonight. I'm curious because there's lots of stuff to choose from to both illustrate the way the interview went. I think the 4 clips we chose were pretty representative, but also in terms of what people emphasize. And I do think that simply by going on Fox, she checks a box, punches a ticket, whatever you want to say. I think she demonstrated improvement over the 60 Minutes interview in a lot of stylistic ways. And I think I do think going on Rogan would probably be a risk, but maybe one we're taking. But I do think that the folks who said she was damaging herself by doing the interviews late and turning them into a high-profile thing. She did a gaggle today. She was also quite solid in that. I do think those folks might retrospectively have a point that she's better now, but I won't say the damage has been done, but the capacity to help herself in interviews could have come earlier based on the improvement I saw there. Okay, so let's bring in our folks here. Not that folks, although Ray, you'll be back, I'm sure. I want to bring in John Della Volpe, who's joining us. If those of you who don't know, John is the pollster at Harvard's August Institute of Politics, the Kennedy School, on John F. Kennedy, what is it called? John F. Kennedy Lane Avenue. What is that street called?
Oh, JFK Street, yes.
JFK Street. Okay.
JFK Street, yeah.
Thank you. And Gordon Hensley, Republican strategist. Guys, welcome in. We're going to add Lauren Leader as well. Just, John, you first, your overall impressions of the interview from a sort of stylistic point of view, but also whether you think public opinion will in any way be altered by that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for having me. Public opinion, as we know, is very difficult to move. When assassination attempts, conventions, debates, debate, very challenging to move. I think from the clips that you shared, that is among her strongest performances over the last couple of weeks, where we saw mostly friendly interviews. What I'm struck by is the degree to which perhaps she's setting up some more distance between herself and President Biden. She's that probably that venue is not the place to talk about the specific differences in the Harris administration, but it looks like she's potentially charting a pathway. And I think there could be some more opportunity to kind of share what it means to be a new generation of leadership, because that is what younger people who I focus on, that is what other key constituencies within the Democratic Party, who I think are kind of fence sitters here in some regard, kind of are looking for. So to me, that's kind of what I was struck by. And also, I think, as you said, her strong message around prosecuting the case against Donald Trump was something that also kind of struck me as one of her strongest bites since the first debate that they had several weeks ago.
Yeah, Gordon, just your overview sense of the interview, please.
Thanks for having me. I kind of have to feel as though she went into this thinking that she was going to have to check another box, but she did. She definitely checked the box. And in the run-up to this, I thought that there was a lot of discussion that she would try to pull a Sister Soldier moment type of situation, which she didn't. But as John just said, she may be setting this up right now to do so in succeeding interviews or in the coming days. To me, what I saw in that interview and over the past week or so, campaigns tend to get people look at them as overly complex. I really think what her problem is that the rationale of her candidacy is very slippery right now. And she's having a very hard time articulating why she's running in a bigger context kind of way. And her significance of the View gaffe, in my opinion, was she completely undermined her rationale of candidacy. And I feel as though that's starting to unravel. And if I were their team, I would be very concerned about them.
Yeah. Just before we go to Lauren for her view of the interview, do you think net this was a positive evening for her or not?
No, I don't. I don't think this was a positive. I don't think this was a positive evening.
All right, Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very different take on it. I mean, look, like you just can't get away from a bunch of things here, which is just the profound double standard, which is that there's no universe under the sun in which Donald Trump is going on MSNBC and doing an interview with Rachel Maddow because he's afraid to do it. And he won't debate her. And she is trying to use that to her advantage. The other part of that is that because she is a woman, there's constant undertone of whether or not she should be taken seriously, whether she has commander-in-chief like strength. I mean, Newt was on the show last week saying she doesn't look like a leader. I mean, we have people who still, there's tremendous double standards at play. And so I actually think what she's doing is exactly right for a lot of reasons. The interview yesterday, you can't separate it totally from her doing Charlemagne the God yesterday, which he was very friendly to her. But remember, they've been extremely critical of her on that show. So she did not walk into a space that was necessarily going to be set up for her success. And I think it was very important. I think it was important that she did Howard Stern. You know, Hillary, a lot of this is like lessons from what went wrong in 2016, right? Which is that, you know, Hillary Clinton was so buttoned up that she appeared not human. And, the best interview Hillary Clinton ever did as a candidate was after the election was over. And that was her interview with Howard Stern, which, had she done that before the election, actually might have really shifted some of the perceptions about her as being likable, which again is like a really complicated issue for women when they run, because they've got to be both tough and likable. It's like this impossible line. So look, I think she's doing all the right things. I also just want to say that I have an article coming out, but All In Together has been tracking the disinformation about her, the online sexist and racist attacks. There have been hundreds of thousands of posts smearing her as stupid, as incompetent, as just on and on and on and on. Hundreds of thousands of those posts. And the only way to really tackle that is to go out and hit back, and then also show that that's not who you are. And so they have to do it, and they're going to keep doing it. And I think it's exactly right, and good for her. And I'd love to see Donald Trump go up against Rachel Maddow. He's never going to do it. Good for her for being brave enough to stand up to, to show up at an unfriendly audience, which is, again, addressing exactly what people keep saying she can't do. So everything they say she can't do, she goes out and does it.
All right.
We have a
Thank
very
you for
cute
that.
little person here with a very
We
large
do.
hat.
We do. I brought on four of you, and I want to try something. I'd love for you all to just talk briefly, just initially briefly, and let Gordon and John and Lauren respond. But if you would please engage on the question of the interview and what you thought of it, question or comment about that, and then let's just try to for us to have a conversation here. So
Also, of the pollsters, John Della Volpe is like really up there among the best. So like people should really ask John Della Volpe all his like geek out data questions, because he's the smartest.
We are going to get to polling and going back to the Fox poll, but we're going to talk first about the interview. So I want to start with Aaron. Aaron, are you old enough to vote?
How are you?
Good. Aaron, just tell us briefly, welcome, where you are, who you're supporting, and what you thought of the interview.
We're in Delaware right now, where my wife is voting for Trump. I guess you could say, undecided. My son is too young to vote, but he's supporting Trump, I guess you could say. We caught parts of the interview. We're watching the rest later. She seems certainly defensive, a bit antagonistic, but as always, I think Bret Baier is very fair, and his questions are straight down the line, and I think people just have to do a better job of answering them.
Okay, thank you for that. Stay with us, Aaron. Carol, where are you? Who are you supporting? What do you think of the interview?
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm in Arizona, and I'm supporting Trump. Not because he's my favorite guy in the whole world, but I've learned, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, where all the 60s hippies and everything, and I was very liberal for a long time, and I just can't do it because I'm a social worker, and I've just seen what happens when you try to help people too much. So I'm just fundamentally against too much help, because it doesn't really work. So I'm scared of all the policies that are too helpful. So I heard her. I thought she did pretty good from what the parts that I heard. I heard that last clip, and it seemed persuasive. That almost scares me, because I just feel like people are itching to believe in someone bigger. Like Trump's just a man. She's just a woman. They're policymakers. I don't put my trust in people like that. I'm more looking at what's going on behind the scenes. That's what upsets me, and that's why I support Trump, because I feel like fundamentally he's not trying to ruin the country. He may not be a great leader in terms of someone to look up to. I've given up on that for him, but I don't look up to her. So I'm looking at the policies, the judges, and that kind of thing for what I trust.
Carol, thank you. Rita, thank you for joining. Tell us where you are, who you're supporting, and what you thought of the interview, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm in California, Southern California, and I am Trump supporter. Have been since 2016. And regarding him, the reason I'm for him, I guess it's really long before he ever came into office. It was always questions in my mind. Why aren't we taking care of ourselves? Why are we taking care of everybody but not taking care of ourselves? There's so much stuff that needs to be taken care of for our people that are here as citizens in all walks of life. And he came into office, he started running for office, and he started saying the things that I kept thinking. It's like, finally, somebody's saying something that I feel like. And
Rita, I do want to have a general conversation, but I want to focus first on the interview. Did you watch either the clips we showed?
Yes, I did.
What did you think of her in the interview?
In her interview, She did finally start getting, Brett started getting under her skin. And honestly, I liked seeing that because I started seeing her. But is she my person? No. I don't
Okay.
believe anything that she's doing. I think she's that chameleon that says
Yeah.
whatever people want to hear.
Okay, Rita, thank you. Karsten, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks where you are, who you're supporting, and what you thought of the interview, please.
Yep. Thanks, Mark, for having me on. So I'm enjoying living the life of the belle of the ball as a somewhat undecided leaning Trump in Pennsylvania. I feel like I didn't
We
do
have one. You're like the
coming in.
unicorn.
What's
You are
that?
the most important. You're the most important person in America right now.
Yes.
Where do
Just
you live in Pennsylvania?
I live 5 minutes from the from where the town hall was. So I ran
Yeah.
down to watch the town hall the other night.
Oh,
So sorry, the dance party. So
yeah. Did,
I
and did you vote for Trump in 16 and or 20?
I actually did not. I voted for Jill Stein.
Hmm.
So a
And
very
what?
strange
And
conversion.
talk about what tonight's interview did for your deliberations.
But he hasn't voted yet.
I mean, it was so I guess the last interview that I was watching was kind of the 60 Minutes interview, and the things that I was kind of keying on with the vice president was just a look of unsureness, and I don't know. She seemed to have a little bit more moxie in the clips that I've seen today, which I think was a little bit more reassuring. So it was good to see a little bit of energy and a little bit of fight.
Good. John, I'd love to turn it over to you if you want to ask any or all of them a question. We've assembled a mini focus group for you, so go ahead.
No, I love it. I guess the question is, what is the one question? Well, for any, if Karsten, if you're someone undecided, what is the one question you want her to answer to make you feel more comfortable about making a decision? That would be kind of one immediate question I would ask you,
Yeah.
or anyone else who's kind of on the fence a little bit still.
Yeah. Karsten, what do you think?
Yeah, personally, I've just seen her, verbally take so many opposing positions on things, particularly things that are, a large, very important to me, like the environment. So like as a Pennsylvanian, when I see, 180-degree flips on fracking, which I don't personally support, I don't really know what to believe. So I haven't really been convinced that either her positions on like, gun buybacks, assault weapons bans, fracking, what's the actual position and what to believe.
Okay. Lauren, question for anybody?
Yeah, I guess the same question, like, because as John said at the top about, at this point, can people be persuaded? And I think, we have a lot of folks on this call that have, long ago made up their mind, but, I think that's like the $1 million question is that does anyone's mind get changed by any of these? Did anyone start to feel like they were more drawn to her than they were that they liked her more or had a different opinion of her after?
Anybody have a more positive view of her after the interview? I know, Rita, you sort of suggested yes, right?
I did. I was just that I for once saw her speaking. I mean, she was mad. You could see it that Brett was making her upset, and she was trying to keep her composure and at the same time trying to get her point across. But just seeing that, it was like, finally, there's a woman in there that really has some feelings. Whether I agree with her or not is completely the different thing, because every time I see her, it's always the dreams and the aspirations and the burdens and all that stuff. It's like, come on, speak to us. Because, she's been our attorney general, and then she was our senator. And then now she's, the VP. And I still am baffled at how she got that. But I didn't see her do anything. It seemed like she sat on in the background. But today,
I mean, she
that
did
was
look,
the one thing that I did like seeing her finally showing us some emotion, some true emotion. At least it looked like that to me.
Gordon, do you have a question or comment for this group?
I go back to our undecided voter. The vice president was, I guess, earlier today. She was with Adam Kinzinger,
That's a good question.
Cheney's, and I was just curious from just a general standpoint, as an undecided voter, do you find those messages appealing to you from the Harris standpoint? and, joining with disaffected Republicans, or what is your thought on that? This as some type of a message that resonates with you.
Was it the question that Republicans showing their support for Harris, does that sway us?
Yeah, that's the question.
People like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, members
There were
of the
100 Republicans that came to Pennsylvania
people who
today to
worked in
show
the
their
Trump
support for her.
administration. Is that something that you look at and makes you more likely to vote for her or not?
Not particularly, but I think I'm kind of strange because I try to I'm a little bit contrarian, so anything that's partisan kind of turns me off. So that doesn't really sway me very much, no.
Okay. Grateful to all four of you for joining. Carson, we're doing a special next Thursday, you might know, called It's All About Pennsylvania. And we're going to have a panel of Pennsylvania undecided voters. We'd love for you to be part of it. So we'll DM you and see if you're able to join us. I want to switch. We can talk more about the interview when we open it up to a wider Q&A, which we'll do. But I want to switch to just talking about the race in general. And Gordon, I'd love for you to tee it up by just sort of summarizing what you wrote in your Substack and that thesis, and let Lauren and John respond.
Sure, and I credit Mike Murphy with using the metaphor of the wall of lava, which is basically the sentiment in all of the polling that the Biden-Harris economic record is something they want to turn the page on. So I guess the issue is that throughout the course of the Harris campaign, I got to give his or her staff lots of credit for basically setting up the convention. The entire ball of wax of the Harris campaign has just been almost, at the outset, was almost like a slick magic trick where they were turning the page, and they were really on the offensive and doing a great job until she started. It was always inevitable she was going to have a problem with some questions in the media. And I have to go back, this is kind of micro, but I go back to the very first interview after the debate at WPVI TV in Philadelphia. I was aghast at how I felt she was really unprepared and didn't have good answers. So I thought that might have been an anomaly, but now as I see her doing more Q&As with the media, she's just not good at it, and she's inconsistent. And when it comes to presidential campaigns and big campaigns in general, at the end of the day, it's the candidate themselves who win it and lose it on their own. Consultants and the media, and one thing I get tired of, is Republicans complaining about the media. The media is now entered this contest in a way that is probably not good for the Harris campaign. And she is now spending time in the barrel for the first time. And we have to see how she comes out of it and what happens then. But I just don't feel as though she is well versed in this genre of discourse, where I noted Mark said earlier a couple of weeks ago that he had seen her in behind closed doors, and she's very good in small groups. She is not proven to be good with the media, and I think that's very problematic moving forward.
Can I just say that, everyone said the exact same thing about Hillary Clinton in 2016, that the campaign wished that they could put her in small rooms with everybody because they would see what a human, relatable person she is. And I think it is, one of the hardest things, I think, for any woman running, for any candidate, but especially hard for women to balance that getting everything exactly right, never making a mistake, never making a gaffe, and also being super authentic and real. And that is I agree that I don't think she's doing it especially well. And everyone likes her more when she's in these, kind of authentic, unscripted moments. But boy, is that a tough thing to pull off when literally everything you say, is so torn apart. And of course, again, back to the double standard, which is Trump's interviews are just insane. I mean, they just ramble on to crazy things. He can't put a coherent sentence together right now. I thought he did well with Micklethwaite in the Bloomberg interview. I thought it was one of his better interviews, but he goes on stage and just randomly starts random. So it's the double standard is that we're expecting perfection from her.
On your first point, I'll say before John, before we go to you, the same was true and was said to be true about George H.W. Bush, John
Yes,
Kerry, Mitt Romney, Al Gore, all
totally.
the same thing. John, I'd
Really,
love for you to
Clinton and
respond.
Bush were the ones who could,
Yeah,
Clinton and Bush were like the best communicators.
And
I mean,
Obama.
Bush just lit up a room, and
Yeah,
Obama obviously too,
yeah,
but because that goes without saying. But it's the hardest thing I think that candidates face on the national stage. I mean, you look at what happened to DeSantis, right? DeSantis, who was beloved in Florida, Jeb Bush, beloved in Florida. As soon as they wind up on the national stage, they look like robots, and they come
yeah.
across in ways that just you can't overcome.
I would only say, and then John,
John,
really want to turn the floor to you. It is part of the job of running for president. It's not like,
sure,
and it's part of the job of being president too. John, would
agreed.
love for you to respond to what Lauren said and to Gordon's thesis.
Yeah, and I think that's why tonight um, was so important. When I look at this campaign, I look at the first 3 or 4 chapters, of which I think she handled really well, right? Coming out of the gate, the internal politics, okay, of that one, the rollout two, and turning that into more of an early movement rather than campaign. To me, it echoes early Obama plus what I saw in 2018 post Parkland in terms of determination and registration. That was exciting. The DNC, where she shared her values and extended herself, was a success by all measures. And then toe to toe in that debate, where people could see her as commander in chief. Those are, to me, unmitigated successes. And then I think that was interrupted perhaps by like those soft interviews, right? Where expectations perhaps were so high and there were some obvious misses there. And I think tonight, depending upon how
Yeah,
the
it's a great
get
way
cut
of
and how
putting
they're
it.
distributed, has an opportunity to kind of set that back and that other direction, because we've all seen in the last 30 days, I think, her at her very best. And also, in the places where she seems less comfortable.
Can
I
I
do
ask?
think, I do think I think that there are a group of people who agree with where she wants to take the country. They're not quite confident that she has the strength and the fight to get us there. And perhaps this was about maybe telling a little bit of that story tonight as well. We'll see.
John, can I ask you, because I wanted to know your take. I mean, I think a lot of Democrats, as Mark has been reporting, people just completely wigging out over the polls in the last few days. But somehow it feels a little different. It felt a little different after those early vote totals got released yesterday. That the surge of, that, so, and I think you talked about this morning, Mark, maybe I missed it, but the new numbers, if you didn't see this, is that yesterday's early vote total, which was the first day of early voting in Georgia, blew the 2000 early vote number out of the water. It is about double what it was. So a historically high early vote turnout. And that does almost always favor Democrats. So I wonder if you feel, because you and I talk about this all the time, that how much turnout, helps Democrats, especially with young voters, et cetera. Were you feeling like those numbers yesterday were maybe a better bellwether than some of the polls that have had us so deadlocked, or you're not ready to see that
Yeah.
as positive maybe as I do?
Yeah, I'm not ready to go that far right now, because it depends upon, an organization on the ground, right? Can set something up to show those numbers.
Mm.
Though I do look at kind of everything. But listen, I think a lot of the news the last couple of days about the African American Hispanic vote, I mean, that's news because the New York Times published their poll. It's not news to anyone who's been looking inside polls over the last couple of years, right? So I'm not sure how much has changed dramatically over the last 15, 30, 45 days on that measure. I think those have been inherent weaknesses now for months, if not years.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon, I want to ask you a
Okay.
question about the culture of the Republican Party when it comes to early vote, right? In the olden days, pre-Trump, Republicans were good at stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Just being organized and getting it done. And then
Yep.
Donald Trump attacked it, even though he votes early. And 20, you could argue Trump lost the White House because he demonized early voting and his party got shellacked. And so the last 4 years has been an attempt by the RNC and Chris LaCivita and others to get Trump to participate in trying to change the culture of the party back. Here's my theory, possible theory, based on the early reports, right? The early reports from Tennessee, parts of Georgia, these are in fact a lot of Republicans turning out. Is it possible that the MAGA energy at the last minute, perhaps, but it's happening. Is it possible that your party is now going to have the attitude of, yeah, let's vote early? Carrie Lake was saying today on Twitter, everybody vote early. It's like your obligation to vote early. Is it possible that the culture will turn so much that we'll know based on the early vote that Republicans are going to have a very good chance to win?
I think that's one of the biggest wild cards of the election that remains to be seen. I think inherently, though, Republicans are habitually inclined to vote on election day. But again, I mean, I would say that's anecdotal on my part, just guessing that. But I suspect that the mechanics are being, heavily worked on, as you said, by the Trump campaign and the RNC. And I think that there will be a stronger early vote, but I suspect that again, on election day will be when predominant of the Republican
I just
vote.
dropped it in the chat. I just dropped it in the chat if people want to look at it. But Target Smart, which Target tracks it, is showing that the early vote total as of today is 53% female, 44% male. And they have some of the other demographic breakdown, the party breakdowns where they can get it. But it's a good tracker, and I always enjoy. So right now it's trending much more Democrat in terms of what that's looking like.
Well, it's clearly good news for the Democrats on that that standpoint.
Here's what I want to do. I'd love to show the Biden Obama video, which doesn't require audio up because it's from a far away. Anybody on here who's a lip reader?
I was working on it earlier. I was like really trying.
Take a look. While we watch that, let me explain what we're going to do now. So go ahead and roll that. I want to open it up. People can ask about whatever they want. Again, Gordon, brilliant strategist. John, great pollster. Ask whatever you want. You want to talk about the interview, you can. Let me just pin this before you roll it here. Go ahead and roll it. You can ask about whatever you want. And if, as I said before, if you're watching on two-way, raise your hand and get in the conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, you're welcome to play in the chat. But as always, please, there's a platform that's different than other platforms. We're not here to fight. We're here to learn from each other. So they could be talking about anything, right? They could be talking about the NFL. They could be talking about which has better beaches, Rehoboth or Martha's Vineyard. Could be anything. But I'm certain that the New York Post will have lip readers tomorrow. And you see innocent bystander Bill Clinton standing there. It's all kind of a curious tableau. But those are some facial expressions. And if you're seeing this for the first time, I think you'll be like me. You'll go on Twitter or Instagram and watch it about 100 times because there's something about it that's quite compelling. All right.
Their relationship is just...
Let's unpin this. Mel, I applaud how energetically you wanted to be in the conversation. I'm hoping this is good. I'm going to unmute you, Mel, ask you to tell people where you are, who you're supporting, who don't know, and then what's on your mind for John or Gordon or Lauren.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm in Colorado, voting for Trump, voted for him twice previously, so biased.
Wait, where in Colorado? What congressional district? Where are you? What town?
The Springs.
Colorado Springs. So I think that's the third, right? Is that
Jeff
okay,
Crank?
anyway, go on.
I think it's Jeff Crank.
Okay.
I just want to bring up, because I know there was some talking about Trump, and he gets away with a lot of some of the things he says and does, which I agree with. I don't necessarily think it's a double standard. I think it's more of he kind of floods the zone with media where you can't, it's hard to nitpick the many things that he may embellish or say. And she's been kind of distant. And I think that brings a bigger lens into every interview and conversation she has. So she's kind of like in a rock and a hard place. Does she do more where she gets criticized, or does she go back to doing less?
Yeah.
What do you
Now, what do
think?
what do you like most about Kamala Harris, and what do you like least about Donald Trump?
And I'm from California originally, so I don't really like her that much, but she's ambitious.
Okay.
Definitely.
And what do you like least about Donald Trump?
If he cannot say some outlandish things so often,
Yeah.
a little bit more discipline. I don't mind as much as other people, but even I have a limit to what I can take.
Mel, did you want to ask a question of the group or just wanted to say what you said?
But just the question of, do you think that because she hasn't been doing it in the past month, that now she has more eyeballs on every interaction and she's getting criticized? Or do you think that was always going to happen no matter how many interviews she did?
Great question. Who wants to weigh in on that?
I mean, I think she's going to get it no matter what. And I also think, look, Democratic politics has always focused heavily on these last 20 days. I mean, it is this, the final stretch is the most important stretch. So I don't actually think it's that unusual, especially since she came into the race so late, that she's doing so much press this late in the game, and she was criticized for not doing it. But like, she's really only been running for, 4 months. It's been a very short race. So yeah, I think it's inevitable. It's just part of the game. I don't know, John, don't you think so? I mean, anyone who does, it's that's how we vet people.
Yeah, and listen, and being ambitious, I think, is a quality that all people who are in politics, certainly run for the presidency, have. And listen, as Lauren said, she had a tough hill to climb in such a short amount of time. And my view is she needs to take every single opportunity she can to talk about her vision for America, specifically how she's going to improve this economy so people have a chance, right, to fulfill and live their best life. I talk to so many people in random focus groups, right, where we're bringing people together who are struggling or just on the verge of being homeless, and her listening.
So John, let me just ask you, every minute she's spending talking about September, January 6th, or about Republicans who don't like Trump's temperament, is that not crowding out talking about being a good steward of a good economy?
I think that, to me, Mark, I think there's three things that she needs to do, right? One is I do think that she needs to kind of remind a generation of folks who really kind of have hazy memories, actually, of January 6th and the Trump presidency, of his vulnerabilities, specifically as related to democracy and also the economic message in terms of the wealthy versus the working class. You have to draw that contrast, one, right? But the second thing is I think that you have this group of folks who are on that fence still somewhere, and I talk to them. There are more than we think. It's a significant number of voters in such a tight election that she's going to be okay with the economy, right? That she's going to chart up kind of path forward. And then I also think there's still work to do on the left as well to make sure that they're motivated and turning out. One of the concerns that I would have inside that campaign is one of the reasons that Biden and Harris won in 2020 is we had record level turnout among younger people and a 60 in a 20-point margin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Without that record turnout, it's a different ballgame this time.
Yeah.
So it's
Mel,
tough.
Mel, thank you. Gordon, did you want to say something?
I'd just like to go back to the beginning of the campaign when Vice President Harris got in. I mean, her original strategy was to not engage with the media. And there was an original theory that, hey, maybe we can just ride this thing all the way through with doing as few media engagements as possible, because I honestly think she has a very talented staff. I really believe that they decided in the beginning that taking fewer chances, even though that might not be enough to fill in the blanks on what people are looking for, was the better option than putting her out there and making mistakes, which she has lately. And I feel as though she's simply been kind of fleshed out of the pocket in regard to dealing with, earned media and media interviews. And she's kind of, it's like she's almost out there in the middle of the ring right now. I just don't think she's comfortable in this arena. And I just feel it's problematic going down the stretch for her. And
sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. Before we bring James in for his question, I want to highlight two things John said that I think are super important. You've probably heard me say them before, but they run counter to what you'll hear in a lot of the media and some pundits. Number one, the number of undecideds is not insignificant, and it's not going to dwindle all of a sudden. So the last week is just about persuasion. I wouldn't say, I think when Biden, Trump calling them double haters was a little bit, unpleasant, but more true. I think now there's double doubters on both sides, and it's a significant number of people. And while we had a guy this morning who was a double doubter who sent in his absentee ballot for Donald Trump, I think a lot of them are going to wait. And so the campaigns have to deal with that. But then, as John said, persuasion and I mean turnout and motivation is going to be huge. And both of them are relying on groups that don't vote automatically, right? She's relying on younger voters. Donald Trump's relying on infrequent voters and new voters and young black men of color. So they both have a lot of persuasion to do, and they both have a lot of motivation to do. And there's, I think, kind of the fuzzy middle, right? A young black man who, if he goes to vote, is going to vote for Trump. You don't need to persuade him, but you sort of do because he's a different kind of motivator than someone who's a regular voter for their party. All right,
Yeah, but
Jane.
Mark,
Yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
add the thing is though, what the huge advantage she has going into this is what we know that women voters and black women especially have done for the last since 1980, and they blew it out of the water the last 3 cycles, right? In every single election where we thought they weren't gonna. So, I
Yep.
think that, I agree with you on all of those turnout big questions, but it is not at all a question about whether, her core voters, which are women, which includes independent women, a lot of those suburban women, the ones that have flipped for Democrats 18, in 18, 20, 22. And then I think it's going to, I'm not concerned that they're turning out.
Yeah, it's almost a certainty in a cycle of uncertainties. It's almost a certainty that if on election night it appears she's winning, the exit polls are going to show a
Women.
devastatingly large number of women, not just white women, as some people say, all women. James,
Yes.
welcome in. Thank you for your patience. Tell people who you're supporting, what's on your mind, and where you are.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. First of all, it's a great operation you have on here. So appreciate you doing this for the election season. I'm here in the Bay Area, and I'm a college student at Berkeley, and I'm supporting Trump. I'm looking to the future, and I feel that since this is my first presidential election, I'm looking to the future and think that that's the best way.
I did not
best
see
path
that coming.
forward. So
James, before you ask a question, because I'd like you to,
Sure.
tell me your answer to the same question. What do you like least about Trump and most about Harris?
Yeah, I think I think what everyone likes least about Trump is his rhetoric. So I think if he can tone that down a little bit, be a little more presidential, which I think he's done a lot more this season, I would say, compared to the last 2 seasons. So I will give credit to him on that. What I like least about Harris is frankly
No,
in California.
most about Harris.
Most about Harris, that's a tough one. I don't really see much out of it. I'm glad she's running, but policy wise, she hasn't really shown, to me as a young voter that she can really deliver for the younger generation. So, I guess, as a woman, she's doing great, compared to, I would say, Hillary Clinton. But other than that, I wouldn't say there's much positives to her,
Yeah. I'm really struck, and James, I'm not singling you out because I'm putting you as a group. We've had almost no Trump voter on this platform who I've asked to say something they like about the vice president. We had someone say ambition tonight, but for the most part,
Yeah.
I'm struck by how uninterested in finding positives in the vice president Trump supporters are.
Well,
James,
Mark, the reason is
Yeah.
because I'm here in California all my life.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything come
Yeah.
out of her as a senator, as an attorney general, and
I
Flynn
hear it
as
from
the vice
I hear it
president.
from
So there's
it's a big
nothing
it's a
positive to see.
it's a
Yeah.
it's a big state, so there's millions of Californians who think what you do. James, what is your question, please?
So I have 2 questions. One is, obviously there's chatter about Trump going on the Joe Rogan podcast, and Joe Rogan is known to be this long form podcaster. So my question is, given that we're less than 20 days out from the election, is that going to have any impact on the race? And then my second question is for John, since he is a pollster and works in that area. What are you kind of seeing in the battleground states in terms of any impact of both candidates on the down ballot candidates? So Senate, congressional, etc. Is there any movement there? Are we seeing like just, drastic differences between the presidential and the Senate and congressional candidates? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, to tackle that one first, and I just knew that I knew you were coming as a Trump voter. I just had that sense. But one of the things that's really interesting, I think, is that we still see some significant gaps with Democrats outperforming, Democratic Senate candidates outperforming, Harris at this point in these states. And this is an era where we see very little ticket splitting. I think other than Maine, you probably know better than me, that we haven't seen that. So that's something to really keep an eye on. Will that continue? Because that's a fact I don't quite understand, right? Whether those folks who are voting for the Senate candidate just need to feel more comfortable, get some more permission from Harris or not. So I think that's one thing worth tracking. So I don't know what other.
Wait,
Okay.
John, do you think that some of that is the like kind of hangover from Biden though, because those gaps were even bigger when Biden was running, and so it's dragged people, and it's hard to get that back right away, or like, and we're
I think
really
that
talking
could be
about like
part of
Tammy
it.
Baldwin, and
I
what do you
also
think?
I also think there are this is the lesson from 22. There are Trump voters, there are, and there are Republican voters, right? And it just seems to me that there's more loyalty towards Trump than there is the Republican Party. So Carrie Lake is benefiting from that, right?
Yeah,
Other
she's
candidates may not be benefiting.
Gordon, are you a Rogan head?
No, I'm not really. I just think that would be really interesting if they both did the interview.
Oh,
Yeah.
who doesn't want to see that? I mean, come on.
I'm against it unless they agree to do all 3 hours. If they
Oh my
do like a
God.
mini, I don't count it. James, how'd you find out about two-way?
I found out through the Megyn Kelly show. So great seeing you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining. Appreciate your participation. David Bonson, welcome in.
Thank you, Mark.
Tell folks who don't know about yourself and then what you want to ask or say.
So I'm a dual resident in California and New York, which is context for what I'm about to say. I didn't vote for Trump in 16 or 20, and I will not vote for him in 24. And I freely admit that I would have a very difficult decision if I were in Pennsylvania. But I'm a lifetime Reaganite conservative, and I have written in Ben Sass once again. And in the spirit of peace, love, and understanding, I want to say that I very much appreciate a lot of what Lauren says on these. And Lauren and I have this in common, that neither of us are voting for Donald Trump. But I do think that there is a really disturbing, soft misogyny of low expectations. To say that Kamala Harris is being treated with a double standard on this is, I think, outrageous. First of all, the comparison of Brett Baer to Rachel Maddow is completely unfair, and nobody would consider that credible. Trump did do the Collins interview at CNN. He is unhinged in his interviews, but you know how a lot of people know that? Because everybody says it over and over again. It's with Harris that all of a sudden we point out that she gets defensive and we're called sexist. It isn't sexist. She does not do these things well, and that has nothing to do with her gender. And so my opinion is that the double standard issue is not true when it comes to the way that they're treated about media. She was asked about 2 or 3 hard questions, and she refuses to answer them. Trump sometimes, when he does answer hard questions, makes things worse for himself. I'm not defending Donald Trump, regardless of the gender of both of these candidates. Harris's problem here is not a double standard with the way Trump is treated. Everybody is extremely critical. And you've heard it time and time again from people today who are voting for Trump, who say the thing I don't like is when he misbehaves. So I just really feel that those who are struggling with the lack of support they have for Harris, I don't think it's about her gender or holding her to a higher standard. I think anybody objectively who watched that interview today with Brett would say that she has a difficult time keeping her composure around routine questions that ought to be answered and allow the American people to hear the answer. I appreciate the time, Mark.
Thank you so much. But,
Lauren,
look, with respect, I absolutely don't see, I actually do not see it that way. And I've spoken to lots of women who don't at all see it that way. And I think, you're completely right that we absolutely have to judge people fairly, and she deserves to be scrutinized. I mean, that is what this process is. She should be scrutinized, and she should be held to a high standard because we're talking about the presidency of the United States. But I want to just give you one example of what women candidates, which she's dealing with, which Trump is not dealing with, which automatically makes the playing field uneven. There have been 172,000 discrete social post attacks. You can go look up, we track it, against her that are explicitly racist and sexist attacks on her, which include things like implications that she slept her way to the top, that she only got into politics because she slept with Willie Brown, that she's a moron, that Trump called her a retard. There are foreign actors, including the Iranian government, who are involved in creating some of these smears. That's been well documented. So regardless, and that is something that women candidates specifically deal with, which is attacks about their sex lives, about their sexuality, about their intelligence, about whether or not they're taken seriously. And while that may not be an automatic double standard run by the media, it is in the field, and it's part of what she has to combat, which is hundreds of thousands of smears that are not about whether she's qualified, but are personal attacks on her race and her gender. Trump doesn't have to deal with that.
Warren, I think in fairness, it is totally untrue that Trump hasn't had to deal with interference from foreign actors. I think he has to deal with attacks on his intelligence all the time, often because he says very stupid things. So there should be attacks on the stupid things that he says.
I mean,
but I think that when you're talking about
sharks and motorboats,
somebody again, there's nut picking that can be done on both sides. There's vile racist things that may happen out there on social media, but I'm referring to within a reasonable spectrum of American political and public life. I don't believe when someone questions her intelligence that has anything to do with her gender, and I don't know anybody who does. I think that she says things that cause me to question her intelligence. I think that she has done that most of her public life. The issues I don't want to get into with Willie Brown, I've been in California for 50 years. I think there are legitimate questions people could ask about her origin in Californian political life. I don't ever want those things getting nasty or personal.
But can I just say that that is the most classic example of the double standard, which is that we are still talking about a relationship that she may or may not have had in her 20s. And yet the conversation about Trump and his multiple wives and paying off porn stars, et cetera.
You don't think we're having those conversations about Trump?
We're not.
I think
people are not still having them.
Well, he got indicted over it, so we did for at least the duration of the trial.
And his
there's sort of a tautology here. Like you're saying we're not talking about it anymore because they spent so much time already talking about it. I think that with the issues with Harris, I would say personally, I promise you that there's nobody in my life who would accuse me of being sexist or misogynist. It's just not in my DNA. But I think it's fair game to question those rambling statements and the memes that go on that don't paint her in a super intelligent light, but I don't think they're sexist. I think they speak to a vacuous persona and a lack of depth. And when she says that I'm putting the policies out there, and there a couple sentences about price controls that were done 40 years ago, it reinforces a narrative. Now, by the way, my critique as someone who believes in movement conservatism and am a Bill Buckley disciple, I think Trump is completely guilty of a lack of substance around policy too. If he ends up losing this election, I think that's going to be why, because he didn't do enough to defend his own economic legacy and has gone to a platitude-driven campaign when he doesn't need to. He can talk about real wage growth and other substantive issues. But those things that I see on social media, and again, we know this is all somewhat self-reinforcing to what we tend to follow, it paints Harris in a very negative light, but not because of her gender and not because of 30-year-old sexual things. It's about the lack of depth around the way that she will answer questions. And people can agree or disagree with what she believes. That's not really what I'm getting to. I think it's hard to argue that Donald Trump is not taking that same scrutiny. I would just say he deserves it.
Okay. We got to stop. I apologize. David, thank you. And Lauren, of course, thank you. Gordon and John, we hope you'll both come back. You're excellent. We'd love to have you be part of the platform here as we head towards Election Day. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, morning meeting. We're back. Sean and Dan and I, I'm certain we'll look more at the Vice President's interview, but there's also the new polls and some stuff that watch for overnight. That's all I can say now. Announced a little earlier tonight, a week from tomorrow, 2 specials. Karl Rove will be with us for 2 hours to do one of his famous Chalk Talks, breaking down the Electoral College, the demography and geography of the 7 battleground states. You will not want to miss that. That is, I think I have my time right, 11 a.m. Eastern to 1 Eastern next Thursday. And then 6 to 8 Eastern next Thursday night, a special edition of this program. It's all about Pennsylvania. We're going to talk about Pennsylvania to voters, politicians, strategists, polling, advertising. 2 full hours devoted to breaking down where the Commonwealth stands, and we'll have some great announcements for you between now and next week about what that will include. But again, mark your calendars, please, for that special day. 4 hours of mega programming, Karl Rove on the Electoral College, and then it's all about Pennsylvania. Grateful to you for all making time. Again, very grateful to Gordon and John for lending their hour to us and their expertise. And we'll see you all tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. on the morning meeting.